discuss this subject on a day when journalism is under severe stress. Journalism is under stress from outside and ironically from inside as well. Journalism is suffering from a credibility deficit. Journalists are suffering from an identity crisis. There is a crisis for livelihood also. In a way, journalism, it seems, is suffering an existential crisis. In this situation, we have just two choices. Choice A, let journalism die in its natural, painful death. Or choice B, let's reinvent journalism. Let's see if we can revive journalism. For me and people like me who believe in journalism and who has had a stake in journalism like me, I have been a journalist for 15 years before joining academics. And it's just so happened that all panelists present here, they have been journalists. Some of them are journalists till now. So we have a stake in journalism in two ways. Our livelihood, our association, and what journalism does to the society. So for people like me, the choice is clear. It's choice B. Let's revive good journalism. And the first step in doing that is to rediscover what good journalism can do to individuals, to society, to civilization. And on this day, we also pay tribute to one of the greatest editors that the modern times have ever had, Harold Evans, the legendary editor of Sunday Times for a number of years. Before Rupert Murdoch, it kind of probably destroyed the journalist Harold Evans as we knew him before he left. He was asked to leave Sunday Times. Within 1 year of Rupert Murdoch taking over Times, he had to leave. And he became a changed man. But anyways, what he had done to journalism, what he had made journalism is something, is a folktale now, it's a modern folktale for journalists, and therefore we must pay tribute to the person who showed in practice what good journalism can do to society, to individual, to political parties, to downtrodden people. May I request Sri Shashi Nayarji, I am thankful to him to have collaborated with Indian Institute of Mass Communication, Dhenkanal, in organizing this e-panel discussion. May I request Mr. Nair to take from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for that introduction, and I'm happy to see Usha Rai from Delhi. Usha, thank you so much for joining. My good friend and a constant supporter of the Press Institute of India, Mr. Paneer Selvan from The Hindu. Thank you, Paneer, for being here. I know you're busy, but you've spared time to be here. It's a subject you love, as you mentioned. So thank you. I don't see Manjira Mazumdar here. Dr. Umar Shankar, nice to see you. Well, I don't think the situation is as bad as Dr. Chatterjee mentioned in his intro. Generally speaking, because, you know, nowadays it's very difficult to find the good. As we speak, you know what's happening in the US. The elections, after a chaotic period of electioneering and campaigning and all that, now they are heading towards more darkness instead of light. So that is a reflection of the times we live in. So we'll confine ourselves to, paying tribute to Sir Harold Evans, and of course, through his life and his work, also look at what good journalism is all about, what we lack today, and what we can do to sort of get some of the goodness back. I see that there are a lot of journalism students here, at least from some of the names I can make out, but whether they are journalism students or young journalists or even others, for those who might not know who Harold Evans was and what he exemplified in his life and in his career, instead of my paying a tribute, I think the fact that we are holding this program is itself a tribute, and we'll all contribute by being here together. So let me introduce Harold Evans, who was born in 1928 June and who died recently in on September 23rd. He was, of course, the editor of the Sunday Times from 1967 to 1981, and also edited the sister title called The Times for a year before, as Dr. Chatterjee mentioned, he was forced out of the position by Rupert Murdoch. Yes, now that voice, I think that sound is gone now. But it was during those years in the 1970s, I presume, must be in the heady 1970s and possibly in the 80s, that marked the high point for Harold Evans. And they say he got rid of stuffy traditions. He worked hard to build circulation, and how, with hard investigative reports, hard-hitting investigative reports, of course, news analysis, eye-catching layouts even then, and pictures. So all that made up the paper, the Sunday Times, during those years. Now, Harold Evans spent two lives in a way, because the first part was in England, Manchester born, and the second part he moved to the United States in 1984. And he became an American citizen, and he retained dual nationality. In America, he held positions in journalism with the US News and World Report, the Atlantic Monthly, and the New York Daily News. And of course, he wrote various books on history, on journalism. And around 2000 or so, he retired from positions as such in journalism and spent more time writing. Of course, he continued to contribute to The Guardian and the BBC Radio 4, and was also incidentally appointed editor-at-large at the Reuters news agency. In 2004, Harold Evans was knighted by Queen Elizabeth for his services to journalism, and this despite his having left Britain 20 years ago and becoming an American citizen. So what did he do? Harold Evans, briefly put, helped redefine high-quality newspapers. He also challenged legal restrictions on the press. And it is through his work that we must sort of discuss or conduct the discussions today, and that is why I'm looking at some of the points that I have been reading the last couple of days about this man. In the US, he also brought new scope and glitz to book publishing, incidentally, where he headed Random House. Like somebody in Reuters mentioned, Harold Evans set the world's gold standard for journalism in the public interest, exposing deadly corporate secrets and also a major spy scandal. His colleagues or people who worked with him say that he had a certain formula: tenacity, there was cunning, there was attention to little detail, and he had a boundless heart. He was best known for his campaign at the Sunday Times and where he, in one of those campaigns, he sought compensation for mothers who had taken the morning sickness drug thalidomide, which led to their children having severely deformed limbs. These are case studies young journalists today must try and read and understand and draw inspiration from, if you ask me. I don't know how many do that. This was an interesting quote that I read, written by Robert McFadden of the New York Times. He describes Harold Evans thus: from smoky Fleet Street newsrooms to star-studded literary circles in New York, Mr. Evans climbed to success with relentless independence, innovative ideas, and an appetite for risks that often led to post-war changes in journalism, publishing, and public tastes on both sides of the Atlantic. For all that, Evans loved the newspaper. He loved print. I don't know how he would have fared in today's digital world, but knowing him and his crusading style, we can assume that he would have held the same kind of exuberance. He once said how delicious the smell of a still warm newsprint is. We experience that almost daily when we receive our newspaper early morning. In one of his books, he'd written, "A newspaper is an argument on the way to a deadline. And if there isn't any argument, there's not much of a newspaper." Once he told National Public Radio, "I think a certain commitment to public good has vanished in the race for circulation." I think this is very important in today's context especially. I think a certain commitment to public good has vanished in the race for circulation. I think that is accentuated when you get newspapers taken over, as you have across America, and now of course elsewhere, by people who either borrow extensively to buy the paper or never had any interest in what real journalism is about in the first place. He added, the kind of investigative journalism, which I think is the absolute essence, is in danger, and in fact, in many places, it has altogether vanished. So very true. He went on to say, we have to have this searchlight to know what the hell is going on. So when newspapers or TV neglect reporting, you get chunks of opinion without any factual basis whatsoever, and we are all going to suffer for it. So that was Sir Harold Matthew Evans and what he exemplified. Let me briefly introduce the speakers here this afternoon. I'll begin with Mr. Paneerselvan. He is the reader's editor of The Hindu, as many of you are aware. He is also executive director of Panos South Asia. Apart from being a regular columnist, it's a weekly column which he writes for The Hindu. He's also a journalism teacher and an adjunct faculty of the prestigious Asian College of Journalism. We incidentally share a common wall, the Press Institute of India and ACJ. With wide experience in both print and television journalism, Mr. Paneerselvan is a board member of the Organization of News Ombudsman and Standards Editor representing Asia. He was a fellow of Reuters Journalism Fellowship Program at the University of Oxford in 1998. And earlier, he had served as the steering committee member and vice chair of the Global Forum for Media Development between 2005 and 2018. So it's a pleasure having you, Paneer. I'm particularly delighted that you're here, and as is everyone else. Usha Rai is one of the foremost women journalists in India, who has over the years brought in social issues, including women's issues, environment, education, health, and rural development into mainstream media. She's worked from Delhi for the Times of India, the Indian Express, and the Hindustan Times. One of the first journalists to bring out a page on development or social development issues for the Indian Express from 1992 to 1996. Incidentally, Usha was once, between 2001 and 2004, at the Press Institute of India. She was deputy director when she ran a newsletter in Hindi and in English. In Hindi, it was called Hum Log, and in English, it was called People. I don't know where those papers are. We'll try and find out if it is there in our archives. That was an initiative that was supported by UNFPA and the Ministry of Health. At the Press Institute of India, Usha also brought out the first study on the status of women journalists in the print media with support of the National Commission for Women. As an independent media consultant between 2004 and 2016, she has brought out a manual on HIV and AIDS, looking at the impact of reporting on the subject on those infected and affected. Usha is a winner of the well-known Chameli Devi Award for Outstanding Women Journalists. She has also got several other awards, including the prestigious FAO Science Writers Award for her article on forest rights and tribal people, and the Media India Award for her series of articles on school education in Delhi that was published in the Times of India. Usha has also been on our panel, on the PII ICRC panel, jury panel, earlier, a couple of years ago. Thank you, Usha, for coming. Pleasure to have you. Manjura Mazumdar is a senior journalist and researcher based in Calcutta, or Kolkata as we know it today. She is also a lecturer in print medium and text journalism at the Media Science Department of Heritage Academy in Kolkata. Her career in journalism includes stints as staff correspondent at the Financial Express, as sub-editor at the Indian Express, and feature writer for the Amrita Bazar Patrika, a paper that is no longer there. She has written for the Telegraph, the Times of India, the Statesman, Outlook, the Hindu Business Line, and of course our journals, Grassroots and Vidra, on issues relating to development, media, arts, and gender. Welcome, Manjura, and we are happy we get to see you.
Namaskar.
Dr. Uma Shankar Pandey is Associate Professor and Head of the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication at the Surendranath College for Women, part of the University of Calcutta in Kolkata. He is the first Indian ambassador of the International Association of Communication Research. And before joining academics, he was a journalist with the Asian Age in Kolkata. He was awarded the Best Media Educator of India by Business World in November 2018, and he's presented papers at numerous conferences both in India and abroad. So thank you, Uma Shankar ji, for being here. Pleasure to have you. So we'll get started right away. I start with Mr. Paneer Selvan. Just with this simple question for you, and I'll pass this question on to the others. We'll have it as a freewheeling chat instead of one speaking after the other. So Paneer, how do you see Harold Evans, or the name of Harold Evans, resonating in today's world of journalism?
See, Harold Evans is the first pragmatist. He, in fact, supported one decision of Rupert Murdoch, that is, to liberate journalism from the hold of the Printers Union. Even that part of the Rupert Murdoch, he did not take a blanket view on Murdoch. He still believes that what Murdoch did with the Printers Union and restoring the dignity of the desk, therefore the desk can decide if the deadline is 1 o'clock, it can close the page at 1. Desk need not have to be browbeaten by the Printers Union to close the pages at 9. And therefore at that level, he was a man who was pragmatic to recognize the strengths of even a overwhelming personality like Rupert Murdoch. The same person was extremely disturbed over his idea as a owner, as a person deciding the content of a newspaper. In fact, in his experience of dealing with Rupert Murdoch, it's called Good Times and Bad Times, there'll be one interesting exchange, and that happens at 10 Downing Street. It was a dinner hosted by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. And when Rupert Murdoch entered, he saw that Mrs. Thatcher was in conversation with Murdoch. And Murdoch loudly declares, here comes a man who thinks he runs the paper. That day, actually, he says, was the beginning of the countdown of his exit from the Times Group. At some level, he was an extremely pragmatic man who managed to balance journalistic creed with the owner's greed. He realized that there will be always a owner's greed, but he never permitted that owner's greed to subsume journalistic creed. So he created that fine wall where journalistic creed could be protected. And when that wall was breached, he quit. So this is the most important idea for me. And this idea, as another one, in the case of Sunday Times and the Times, he quit because the wall was breached. And in the case of Northern Echo, he felt that there is two talented successors are waiting, and he shouldn't be denying them the space to be at the helm. The way he managed this is also interesting. Leaving Northern Echo for London was because he realized that there were two extremely talented youngsters who could run the paper, and if he is going to stay there, their elevation will never happen. There is an interesting lesson about these two quitting. Why he quit Northern Echo, where he created the space for the youngster to take over, and he quit Times and Sunday Times because of the owner's overreach. We will talk about other elements in the next round. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Pareer. Usha, your take?
Okay. I think Harold Adams' expose of the thalidomide kids, the drug that taken to prevent morning sickness by mothers, which resulted in so many children born with deformed legs, is the kind of thing which is echoed, I think, even as recently as I think last year, or was it the year before, where we had the Johnson & Johnson case, where they had distributed a whole lot of faulty hip replacements, which resulted in a major outcry, and people went to the courts demanding the compensation. In fact, I think it was the Indian Express which took it up in a big way and ensured compensation. But I would have liked to see more of the story and where it has gone finally, which I think is somehow missing. But they did a phenomenal job on taking up this case, and it was very similar to the stories that Harold Evans did when he took up that case of the children born with deformities. In fact, in the health sector, there are several such instances. I think the whole thing about sex selection in India, the whole thing has been exposed, where journalists have actually worked in tandem with various activists and have actually caught doctors doing sex selection abortions, which has resulted in a lot of change in the laws. In fact, I think there are several examples in the health field where women journalists have actually taken on the role of activism. In the social sector, in fact, many of these stories have started off in this way. I remember the first one of the first stories that broke out on dowry marriages and what happens to the woman who refuses to get the dowry was broken when a teacher from one of the colleges in Delhi actually saw from outside her balcony a woman being set on fire, and that began the series of investigations. And they were actually, after that, whole groups of women got together and they began to hold rallies outside houses where a woman was actually burnt to death because she did not bring enough dowry. So I think there have been several instances where this has been replicated. I think the problem is really with television in India. The print media is much more sedate and much more, it is, I think it is largely television which tends to sensationalize this whole thing on what happened with the actor Sushant Singh, and the way the whole thing was portrayed was really very it was very sad to see public figures being pulled down and constantly being shown on television in the manner that they were. So I think the fault lies more with television. There are some channels who are very, sort of much more serious and do good investigative journalism. But this whole thing for TRPs, to win TRPs is such that people to sensationalize, and that's much more in the electronic medium than in the print medium. Shashi?
Yeah. Thanks, Usha, for those inputs. Manjira, how does the name resonate with you?
We grew up with such names, when we wanted to get into journalism. So these were big names like Harold Evans, later, of course, Robert Frisk. And, these are the names which we heard. But when we came into journalism, a lot of good things were happening in India itself. Like we looked upon Statesman as a bit stodgy, but Telegraph was making a lot of news by being very oriented to investigative journalism and not so much development journalism, but more of investigative journalism. Now, I do not have any personal, I would say stories, but how he resonated with me. I would like to focus on more, as Dr. Chatterjee said, that, can we reinvent journalism? Because we are going through a lot of churn now, and journalism is not the way it used to be. So what do we do about that? And but I want to be very realistic about it. I feel that good journalism, is a bit of an irony, because journalism, there's nothing good about it. In a way, you are asking questions which are not comfortable. So when you're asking questions, there will be a bias, and then there will be, even if investigative journalism, like right now with the channels, there are going to be sides. Is it Sushant? Some are taking Sushant's side, some are saying taking Riya's side. So what do we do now, with so many sides? And, I think journalism was in a way more pristine some time back. But now with so much of, other platforms coming, and are they dictating what journalism should be? So I would like to talk about that more than the examples these luminaries set. Of course, we should follow them, but I want to paint a little bit more of a realistic picture, that what can be done now. It should be done. I mean, we all feel there is a need, but how do we go about it now? Can it still
we'll get. I think we'll get to that as we go along. This was just
yes. I would like to focus on that.
We're talking about. Yeah, no, this is just the opening question, since we're talking about the man and his times.
Yeah.
Uma Shankarji, what do you tell your students there about good journalism in the light of Harold Evans? After that, we will go on.
In fact, we, in my student days, I remember his 5-set, editing and design book that, we almost grew up with. And it was, just, the circle turning, full wheel when his Why Writing Well Matters, came out just 2 years back. And, that part of it, probably I'll come back later. But one aspect of Harold Evans, instinctive journalism that has, stayed on with me, and we talk about that, is, not many people remember his contribution to South Asia, to the formation of even, Bangladesh, for that matter. There was a journalist by the name of Anthony Mascarenhas, a Goan, a Pakistani Goan, who was, employed in Karachi. And on 14th April 1971, the Pakistani government, took them to a trip of then East Pakistan, to show them around. And 8 people were there, and 7 of them, actually wrote what the government wanted them to write. Mr. Mascarenhas flew down to London because whatever he would write would not be accepted by the censors, not even the impact of possible famine there. And through Frank Giles, the Foreign Affairs desk there, he met Mr. Harold Evans in his office in May 1971. And he writes in his book, and there's a fantastic autobiography. If the students, they haven't read My Paper Chase, they should read about that. He said when he heard Mascarenhas, on page 392 writes, it says, I instinctively believed Mascarenhas. And he said that I can't give you a job, but I can pay you money to bring your family out of Pakistan to report that. So basically, he sent him back to Pakistan, and his wife was sent to Rome, and in true James Bond style, he said that Anne's operation successful. And then he himself, he wasn't allowed to go out, because correspondents there were allowed to go out only once a year. So he took a flight to Peshawar. From there, he walked down to Afghanistan, and then he sent the story to Sunday Times. And on 13th June edition, the entire center spread was given away, and Harold Evans backed his instinct to put out a 2-page flyer, 72 point one giant of a flyer saying genocide, and then there was an editorial saying stop the killing. Years later, when Mrs. Gandhi met Harold Evans on a visit here, when he was on a visit here, he said that years later in Delhi, India's Prime Minister Indira Gandhi told me that Mascarenhas' report had shocked her deeply, setting her on a campaign of personal diplomacy in the European capitals and Moscow to prepare the ground for India's armed intervention. So in a way, the first international story about the genocide in East Pakistan was because Harold Evans backed his instinct, and he backed his reporters. And and the way he presented that reporter, there are stories about how that multi-deck headline was brought, and he just removed it in one go, and he just wrote genocide, one top. And if you search Google, you'll find that. So just to take it a little bit forward,
can we just stop here for a while, Obasha?
Yes.
We'll come back to
Sure.
that, because
Sure.
we have to keep the time element in mind.
Sure.
So let's get back to good journalism. I have myself noted down some points, and possibly if I throw them open to answers from the panel, it might be nice, I thought. When we talk about good journalism, one of the things we, at least some of us, find that young reporters, editors, or young journalists do not have the kind of knowledge that we would expect journalists to have. For example, journalists are supposed to have knowledge that is fairly comprehensive. I'm sure all of you will agree, reasonably deep knowledge, because you're expected to report on a wide gamut of subjects, although in today's world it might have changed a bit. So as someone said, you might need to know something from the sublime to the ridiculous, and you must also have this nose for news, wanting to ask questions all the time. So this background knowledge is important. Do you think this kind of knowledge is missing in some of our young journalists today? Usha, would you like to take the question?
Yeah. Shashi, I think that a lot of journalists, they start very young, and it's much better today than it was in our times, when many of us came straight in from college, and some enrolled in a school of journalism, others just joined a newspaper and learned on the job. But it's learning on the job that they acquired their knowledge and their information. And it's the newspapers which allowed them the opportunity to specialize in certain areas. And that's where they found out what they were interested in. For example, when I started out, I was sent to Delhi Zoo. And I loved writing about the animals in the zoo. And that developed my interest into the entire thing of environment. And I began to write about forests. I began to write about big dams. So it is actually the newspaper that steers you. And the kind of learning that you need, which is factual information that you get from experts in the field, you get as a journalist. But these days, with Google and so much of information around, journalists are able to tap into this information very, very easily.
Paneer, you'd like to add on to that?
Right, Shashi?
Yeah. Thanks, Usha. I know that, maybe some of the big newspapers do train journalists this way, or as Usha mentioned, channelize their energies in the right direction. But what has been your experience, Paneer, working with the Hindu for so many years and with other establishments?
Definitely in the 80s, we had a seniors who had time for mentoring. Now the idea of mentoring has disappeared. And the second is this idea of Rupert Murdoch to have external experts. What has happened is that is the most disturbing one. We are no longer investing on our journalists to become domain experts. For instance, Hindu invested so much to have a tennis expert in Nirmal Shekhar. It invested so much to have a banking expert in CRL Narasimhan. We had in-house diplomatic experts. We had in-house economic experts like C. Ramanogar Reddy, who later became the editor of EPW. Today, what is happening is that on all these domain knowledge which is required, we are sourcing it from retired diplomats, retired banking chairmen, former sportsperson. All of them have a certain amount of vested interest or a post-retirement second job applications. There was that critical distance where an informed in-house expert had, and that critical distance brought in certain amount of edge to their reporting and to their writing. That is missing. Definitely, Sunil Gavaskar understands ball better than a person who used to write on cricket. But the person who was writing on cricket was never opting for a place in the selection committee. He was not opting for a place in the BCCI administrative committee. Similarly, the banking editors were not looking for a placement in the RBI committee or to become a advisor to the government on banking reforms. Journalists who are handling on the issues of diplomacy were not rooting to become an ambassador. But a former retired foreign secretary or a former ambassador would like to be on the good side of the government's book. But at some level, what happened is this economizing your own investment on in-house resources, because this also costs money. If to have dedicated in-house experts on various subjects, we keep investing. There was at some level this rollback on investment on in-house expertise has cost us, by having people who want to be part of the establishment, interpreting the establishment's decision. Therefore, I think this is the biggest loss what we are witnessing over the last 10-15 years. Initially, when it started with the sports, it had a different ring. Where people like to hear Vijay Amritraj talking about the Wimbledon, or Chris Evert talking about the Wimbledon final. They felt that these people are bringing in an additional edge. But the moment it moved completely to the people from the own sector, representing that sector, without having that critical distance between evaluating the sector and being part of the sector, it's creating a huge problem, and we are paying a price. And this is where, if you actually look at the economics of the major newspapers and the television channels, news gathering expenditures come down. And quite a lot of opinions are happening. When in 84 or 85, when we entered journalism, our news editors used to say that journalism travels on two tracks. One track is to bear witness, and the other track is to make sense. Therefore, they said you report, which means you bear witness, and somebody is doing a edit page analysis, which means he is making sense of what you witnessed. And they said that this journalism was on an even keel because it traveled on this two track. One of bearing witness, another one is of making sense of what was happening. But today, when you are going to have only commenters, without actually reporting on the facts, the suspension of this bearing witness element is hurting us.
Yeah, what about young reporters, Paneer? My question was also directed at that, because you teach at the ACJ too. How do you find them?
Young journalists today are anyway inferior to us. Unfortunately, they don't have the newsrooms which can spend time in mentoring them. See, I started covering Sri Lanka in '85. That is within a year after joining journalism. But starting from G. Parsadi, who was Government of India's interlocutor, to various seniors, they said that, okay, look at this element, look at the Sixth Amendment, look at this, look at... But there was a certain amount of mentoring. By 1988, when people said that, oh, Paneer knows Sri Lanka well, it was not my doing. It was others' generosity which helped me to understand that. Unfortunately, it's very easy to dismiss the youngsters when there is a lack of generosity from within the house, and the lack of generosity happens because the newsrooms have shrunk. And we had one deadline, and today there is a continuous deadlines. The moment it's a continuous there were the dynamics of the newsroom which is going through this huge change. Instead of working for a one deadline, if you're going to work for a hourly deadline. If you're working with a hourly deadline, I have seen it with the legal correspondence. 15 minutes they look at the court proceedings. Next 15 minutes they try to compose the report for that hour. Because they should also write in a way that it makes sense to the general reader. Imagine the same legal correspondent if he or she spent the entire day in the court and coming back to the office at 4 and having time till 7 to file the report. There was time to process also. Half of the issue is that our newsrooms are not geared for a continuous deadline process. Newsrooms are frozen in a structure for a single deadline. But the demand on the new generation journalists is, there are two words which are extremely disturbing. One word is called multitasking. Multitasking is essentially exploiting journalists. It is not empowering us. I have to do television, I have to do podcast, I have to interpret, I have to write, I have to report. No, there is also what we have to do is, this multitasking is like the internet search. Internet search, you put anything, it will give you millions of pages. Who has any ability to go through those million pages? Whereas if it would have been a finite research, saying that, okay, on federalism, look at K.K. George and Gulati, or look at S. Guhan's work, then it makes that finiteness gives you an idea on these subjects. If I'm going to put a word federalism and if I'm going to get 3.7 million pages, I am as ignorant as I am when I type the word federalism in my search engine. Therefore, at some level, this technology is not empowering us. Technology is impoverishing us, creating an illusion that knowledge is one click away. Knowledge is never one click away. Lot of things takes time to understand. There are nuances. There is a difference between, I'm talking about federalism because that was the area which I was handling before becoming the ombudsman. In the center-state relations, there's a fiscal federalism, there's a political federalism, then there is a dominant federalism, and also the question of how the concurrent list can be used by the center to deny the rights of the state. All these things are actually full of nuances. And for all these things, we went and we sat with the experts, and the experts took their time to explain. And all these things are possible primarily because of the one deadline formula. Now that this continuous deadline formula, unless and otherwise, when you're talking about reinventing the news industry or reinventing journalism itself, We need to have an idea where sufficient time for reflection and sufficient time for meaningful news gathering happens. Only then. See, you can have a multiple deadlines, but have a multiple team. Don't use this nonsensical idea of multi-skilling. Multi-skilling is actually what I see with the youngsters is a much bigger burnout. What I see with the youngsters is not lack of talent, but what I see with the youngsters is the huge burnout. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what we've also seen over the years, that, youngsters come with a lot of passion, the fire in their belly. But as you mentioned rightly, there's a burnout, and then some interesting points you made about multitasking. It's just like having, other operations on a shift basis. You have different teams, but that's possibly, not possible here. Manjira or Umashankarji, you want to quickly add to what Paneer has said on this?
I'll add. In fact, I want to take off from where Mr. Paneer Selvan has said, is the nature of the newsroom has changed. Earlier, there was, the reporters, they were given a beat, and the beat, they covered exhaustively. Then later on, they gained some expertise on that. Then there were news editors who also went through their reports. So it was not one person who was doing the entire thing. There was like a team, a hierarchy, and then the news was published. And then they became specialists. But now there are too many generalists, general, I mean, they've been asked to do this, that, too many things together. Maybe this, multitasking, like he said. So they cannot build up an area of expertise. So we are then sourcing it from outside, specialists like MBAs who do, diplomats who are writing on international relations. So, and the second thing is the nature of the newsroom has, of course, changed, and people now have become like specialists. The readers have become specialists because they are not getting what they are getting from the newspaper, and that gap is being plugged by all these social media, WhatsApp. So there's a big hiatus, on what news should be, what we are getting, and there's absolutely like, those old values of journalism have disappeared. Like I believe Harold Evans only had said that, when you investigate, you go on peeling the onion. So one reporter just didn't do the peeling. Even the news editor, then everything, they discussed it and then the news went. But now, the nature of the beast, where is the time for all this? Because by the time they get to do with a news report or an investigative report, internet has already broken it in, it's gone all over, the internet. So time, money, the thing that is required, newspapers are not doing. So that has corrupted also journalism, how it is to be,
Yep. Thanks. Uma, Shankar, anything you want to add?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. So I'll just go back to, one wonderful typology of news by Moloch and Lester in the 70s. He says that if you are the person who's planning an event and you are the person who's promoting the event, it's routine news. If you plan it and somebody else promotes it, it's a scandal. And if it's neither planned and nor promoted, it's an accident. So a lot of news, general news would, fall into that category. The problem with beat system is that, it's very bureaucratically designed. And young reporters, and I remember ourselves as well, it is very much dependent on official sources. And that is where, some, question marks arise. Over-reliance on official sources make it, more kind of, bureaucratic kind of a journalism. Harold Evans in his the book that I was talking about, he talks about, how those Dunkirk soldiers, the ones who came back, and when you actually see them on ground, what the official version is, there's a big mismatch in that. And that is very important. I mean, we've been talking about that for the last so many years. Problem with present day reporters in many cases is that, they do not go onto the ground to talk to people, to talk to the protagonists, talk to, people who are involved there, so that, they can get maybe even the other side, which kind of, gels with what Mr. Paneer Selvan said about multitasking. You're supposed to do so many things at the same time that you don't even get to question those official sources, or not even trying to see what could be as Manjira just said about peeling the onion, not just going by that, but so that reliance on that particular typology and this kind of over reliance on official sources is one thing that we can learn from Harold Evans's own.
Okay, Umar Ashok. Usha,
If I
you
can
were
just add something here.
yeah, quickly, Manjira. Yeah.
Quickly. No, I think Uma Shankar ji is saying that earlier it was very bureaucratic, but no, that was just the initial time. Then we had to do routine stories and our own special investigative stories in Indian Express.
Yes,
so
yes.
that the beat gave us a gateway to that. But
Sure.
everybody had to, it wasn't, in fact, now everybody is doing press release from the PR companies.
True.
Now it's become lazy journalism. That's the
True, ma'am.
point. Everything
Right.
has become PR-ified.
Absolutely.
Can I request those who are not speaking to kindly mute yourselves, please? Because there's a lot of echo. It's not very clear. Those who are not speaking, kindly mute. Yeah. Usha, you mentioned television, as having sort of brought all that is not very good to the fore in journalism. There are so many questions, one of which is, do young journalists today really know how to handle sensitive issues? Are they aware that they have a role in society? And are they aware that they need to be responsible? Or is it just about creating some sort of frenzy by appealing to emotions and not the mind, like you see on television sometimes or often? Is it okay to
Yes,
ignore
sir.
reality and any search for the uncomfortable truth and things like that? And a sort of a corollary question also, or a point here. In the good old days, we were taught to, the 3 C's of, editing: check, condense, and clarify. Is there enough checking being done now, the kind of double checking that we used to do in the good old days? And do journalists have the time to, clarify? Or
Shashi, I think television. Shashi,
so
I think
have all
journalism-
these taken a backseat? Sorry, go on.
I think television journalism is very, very different from print journalism, and they have to be first with the news, which is why I think there are a lot of discrepancies and a lot of untruth sometimes, something that is sensational invariably, because of this great desire to get TRPs, to break news, results in things going unchecked. So you need it's only the newspaper, only the television channels which have good editors and good professionals at various levels that are able to check and screen information before it comes. Invariably these young journalists will just go with a mic and put it before somebody is just lost, and say, how are you feeling? Somebody's lost a child and said, how are you feeling? There is a lack of sensitivity which comes, they need to mature, but it's the young people just out are enthusiastic, willing to go out and get a story that join these at the initial stages, and they learn on the job, and it takes a couple of years. The result is we have a lot of these kind of sensational news, unplanned questions which are really sort of annoying and insensitive. So if you do require mentoring, as people are saying, you require mentoring, you need a system of screening. But this whole thing is the TRPs, the desire for TRPs is the overriding factor which guides television journalism.
Yeah, I got that, Usha. I'll just add another quick point and we'll throw it open to the others. Now, I mentioned the 3 C's, the checking, the condensing, and the clarifying sort of thing. And also, sometimes going by the kind of reports that we see, accuracy takes a beating sometimes. So we often wonder, do the young reporters today know the subject they are covering, or do they even make an honest attempt to understand it? Also, we were talking about Googling up information. So do they have the patience for legwork and also the desire to put in hours of work to get to the bottom of a story. Are these in short supply these days, and is that why we are not finding the kind of good journalism that we want? Paneer, you want to answer this first?
Yes. First thing is, it's very easy to talk about youngsters not measuring up. I will not blame any of these youngsters because the very nature of live reporting has removed the idea of processing. Earlier, we had real processing. You file the report, the chief reporter takes a look at it, then the desk looks at it. Both of them ask questions. Therefore, what you wrote by 6 o'clock, by the time it goes for typesetting and page making at 8:30, it's a different copy. Okay. Therefore, there is always this element of processing which made journalism what it was. Therefore, the act of verification, cross-checking, authenticity, looking at attribution, even in the cases where we are not able to attribute due to other reasons, we informed our editors from who we have sourced. Therefore, the editors were in the loop. Even in the earlier days when we said that according to sources, almost all the senior editors and the persons who are manning the people who are at the gatekeeping positions knew on what basis he took this decision. Today with the live telecast, there is absolutely no place for processing. And let's not kid ourselves that not all young journalists are Ed Murrow. Ed Murrow became Ed Murrow after covering the big two wars. By the time when Ed Murrow was handling McCarthy, Ed Murrow had 35 years of experience behind him. 35 years of experience across the two sides of Atlantic cannot be expected from a 26-year-old who has been given a camera and asked to cover a major international development like India-Pakistan border issue. There's quite a lot of problems with the media ownership and the investment in the news. And partly the biggest issue is, you said that why not you do the Google and search. Google, Twitter and Facebook destroyed us. They are not digital enablers, they are digital predators. They take away 85% of the digital revenue. A set of people who take away the 85% of the digital revenue expect the 15% of the revenue to be spread across all the content producers to produce credible news gathering. Therefore, the political economy of news gathering itself has changed. We were permitted to have, when I joined journalism, Hindu had about 18 foreign correspondents. Today we have 6. That is the level of financial stress within the sector. And who are growing? Silicon Valley giants. And we think that the Silicon Valley giants are going to help us finding solutions and help us becoming knowledgeable. Do a Google search on a specific one. And if you are able to tweak the algorithm, you can really see that how the IT cells of various political parties, starting from the Republican Party in the US to the various parties, how they are manipulating the news. The first 7 pages will be propaganda stories. They have a theory saying that no, we put out all the stories. That story by the critical story will be in the page 18 of their search engine. That's how they play around with the algorithm. Given these facts, meeting an economist and getting a briefing is different from Googling on, say, something like GST and forming your opinion. Which means it's going to take time. You have to travel from your office to that economist's place, spend about a couple of hours, and the economists generally tend to come up with certain terminologies with which we are not familiar. We ask them twice, then they explain. We remember when Arshad Mehta scam happened. I was working for a magazine called Business India, and there were too many of these abbreviations. We didn't understand half of them. One was the BR. We never knew what the hell is that BR. It means bankers receipt. Then we called RBI and we said that, look, there are too many abbreviations. What can we do? RBI Deputy Governor organized a special afternoon explaining each of the terms. That sharpened the reportage. And it means that we need that much of investment and that much of time. Therefore, the idea is, unless and otherwise the news organizations move away from the idea of I am first to I am correct, I don't think we can reinvent journalism. Journalism needs I am correct rather than I am first. Thank you.
So in the race, I think in the competitive world, in the world of competition, you have to be always right first and not first with the news. I think that's important. That's what you're saying. Manjula, you want to quickly add something? I think you wanted to say something. It's about legwork. And now I just want to add this. I am very supportive of young journalists. Always. I'm just here in this forum. I'm just asking critical questions. So,
No. Young journalists have to do a lot in the sense that, it's a request to media schools. They have to have a sense of history, which I feel they don't have. Like our journalism grew after independence, it was one kind, okay. It may have been a bit boring because, everything was supposed to be like, nation building. But emergency was one turning point. So students nowadays don't have any idea of all this, the history, because they think it's all television. And now we have foxification of television in India when they had 30 years of television before it evolved. And overnight we have this television, where, people we are following the American business model of TRPs and all that, So I feel that sense of history has to be among the young journalists. They don't have that kind of commitment, and they want to get into a more glamour world of television where they are seen than they are, seen and heard than what, you write. So, but I still think, I think, like Bob Dylan said, everything is broken, but we can put the pieces back, provided we know, we work, like they say, that you have to be in the system to change the system, We can't, think of doing things which are now already, we've come a long way, We can't suddenly go back to only print, the different platforms. We have to be adaptive now, but keep some areas non-negotiable.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Manjira. Before I come to Uma Shankar ji, just a sec. I just want to draw in Usha on this. Since we are talking about young journalists, journalism over the years, you've been a senior journalist. You've covered so many decades. You've been in the profession. What is your take on the quality of journalism as such over the years? Because generally, sometimes the perception is that journalism, the standards have deteriorated in some ways. I mean, what is your frank take on this?
I don't think it has deteriorated. I think maybe the general news coverage, the thing is stories have become smaller, print media, a very, very small story. There's not enough scope for in-depth, but I think journalists today are better educated, lot of people, and they come from schools of journalism, they come with a lot of experience. Many of them want to go into some other. The ones, the really serious journalists are attracted to journalism even when they have done other courses, and they come into it with a great deal of heart in it. But they are very often quickly disillusioned because they don't get the opportunities in the print media to go out, to travel and write. But I think the young journalists are serious. Of course, a lot of them are now also going into phone journalism and mojo journalism, as they call it, quick journalism. So the thing is, serious newspaper journalism, the space is shrinking, and young journalists are moving out, I would say, Shashi.
Yeah. Okay.
I see that there are a lot of journalists asking questions. I see questions coming on my screen. So maybe we can take some of those questions.
Yeah, we will do that. We have some time for that. Uma Shankar ji, you wanted to say something quickly.
Yeah. So taking from the digital part of it, we must understand that the younger journalists these days, they are dealing with so many of these different things. First of all, they are supposed to do what many houses call platform agnostic journalism. They have to create content for more than the print media. They have to keep it doing for many platforms. Another very, very important thing, and I think this has to be touched upon in a gathering like this, is what Mr. Parin Selvan talked about. The surveillance capitalism. That we are. So all these big giants that not only have all the behavioral inputs about us, much more that we can ever imagine, but they also have the power to modulate our behavior. Even the ones who are on the digital platform. So this is one very important, class of people that we are dealing with. People who access Facebook or Google or all these platforms, and we've seen the problem with Cambridge Analytica. I don't want to get into that, but this is a reality. And I'll refer to Shoshana Zuboff's wonderful book on the age of surveillance capitalism. And this must be made, a compulsory reading for our young journalists, because it's not just about how they keep tabs on us, but how they're empowered to, or how how much power they have to even influence us. So a lot of content that we generate, doesn't carry a lot of traction with many viewers or consumers, because probably they are looking for some content which they already are inclined to. So a lot more sophistication into the kind of audience and kind of problems that these journalists have to face.
Yeah, okay. So just let's quickly look at, since we are here, before we take the questions, I think there are a few questions in the chat box. But before that, since we have academics here, we have journalists here, there's always been this talk about, what is being taught is not really current, and a lot of the syllabus or the curriculum is outdated in, some of the institutes in that teach journalism. And when the students come out, they are not really ready to be there running out in the field. So this lack of the curriculum being updated, etc. How true and how would you take this question? I mean, do you think it is right to say that the curriculum is not updated in several of these major institutions? You want to take it, Paneer?
See, the idea is journalism school's duration varies from 1 year to 3 years. In 1 year to 3 years, nobody is going to come out as an expert. And if the publications or the channels are expecting the person who is coming out to be an expert, say, I can't send out a student and expect her to match Usha Roy's experience. That is about decades of field reporting that gave certain amount of insight. Therefore, to say that somebody is not industry ready is a misnomer, because industry ready is not at the entry level. Industry expects them to be ready at some other level. They want to pay them the salary of the entry level. They want them to deliver at some other level. There is a whole range of folk tongue experiences what we are hearing from the media managers. When you are talking about media, we have to understand there are two worlds. The world of the editors and their requirements, and the world of the managers and their requirements. Unfortunately, it's a world of the managers which is subsuming the voices of the editors. When you are saying industry ready, what do we mean by industry ready? Do we want them to come out of the college, journalism school, and start writing an edit on, say, Indo-US-China triangle? Our IFS officers, after reaching the level of joint secretary, can't handle it immediately. So this industry ready, the next generation is not ready, are all bunkum. And the height of the managers lying is the reduction of attention span. Well, they said that the attention span has really shrunk. We had a student, it was in 2014, she stood up at ACJ and she asked, Sir, from what basis these people are saying that our attention span has shrunk? Those guys, when they were youngsters, they were reading Enid Blyton, which is this thick. In our generation, we are reading J.K. Rowling, which is this thick. When we are reading a 600-page book, and you guys who read a 140-page work have the temerity to call that we have attention span deficit. Therefore, I think we have to spend more time with the youngsters to understand their sharpness as well as their frustrations. We are now becoming an imposing society of the managerial lack of imagination. We have to liberate journalism from the managerial lack of imagination and bring back the journalistic zeal to it.
Absolutely. Well put. I agree. Complete. No, I asked the question because you mentioned burnout.
Yeah. Burnout happens because of all these things.
Yeah, Manjira, you wanted to add something?
No, the question of ethics, I believe editor owner had once said, oh, ethics are for journalism students. After when they join, we throw ethics out of the window. So, there's a big gap, a big disconnect, what they are learning, and you cannot teach them to be unethical. You can teach them to be aggressive, assertive. So when they go out, this big disconnect, I think, which is causing, whatever problems we are facing. The huge disconnect, like editors are now more managers, and I think for newspaper leading, they want, and below them are the coordinators. You don't even have an editorial position for them. They are like coordinators, and you have editorial managers. So the roles are also not very well defined.
Sorry, I have this. Sorry to interrupt. I have this problem of working from home. Somebody is ringing the bell. I have to just go down and open. Please say excuse me for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, sure, Panir. No, not a problem. Okay.
So, and another thing is, I think everybody is looking at things from a certain prism. The owners, the readers. Nobody's coming on the same page. And finally, I think journalism has to be extracted from what we know as mass media. People think journalism is something which is going to be entertaining, which is not true. So they are finding it boring. Simple as that.
No, but there are a lot of people who who love entertainment and read all that. No, all the supplements.
No, they do read, and these websites which people are writing for, I think they are very interesting to read. Text journalism, forget print. Now it's more about text journalism. So I think in place of print, we have a lot of these online websites which young journalists are writing for internationally also. And they are all fired up, and you can see that, but it's still got a very limited readership. It has to grow.
Yeah, got it, Manjira. Thanks. Usha, now, in one of your articles that you wrote for us, and we know what's happening, in today's media world here, at least in India, many people have lost jobs. There are many who haven't got salaries. It's still quite gloomy. Somebody recently told me that there isn't much light at the end of the tunnel yet. How do you encourage people to join the profession?
I think there's a dearth of jobs also.
Yes.
Terrible dearth of jobs. People are desperate for jobs. And I can't tell you the number of journalists who have lost their jobs. So younger people, if they can get in, and they will take in younger people. If they are taking in people, they will hire younger people who can take on lower salaries and on contracts. But the situation is bad, and I think the job seems so, as Manjira said, there are other ways of online platforms, other areas, avenues for writing. But the print media as it is, the newspaper world, it's not opening up for these people. So it's the only spaces left for you is if you're an expert, you write on the edit page or the op-ed page, or you're lucky enough to get a column, then you can do it. I think the spaces are shrinking.
Yeah. Panir, any light at the end of the tunnel? In terms of attracting youngsters.
Year, and this year it has become really dark because the COVID effect is also major additional effect. Partly we think we should be blaming our media managers, because when the digital disruption happened in the West, the Indian media managers said, no, it's not going to touch us. Look at our internet spread. It's so low. In fact, one of the presidents of the INS said that newspaper industry is like sun. It is rising in the east and it's setting in the west. And when we asked him, he said that we have 40 years to adjust. And remember, this by the INS president was said in 2010. Therefore, our ability to see the threat before us by the managers. When I said that we should move away from the managerial imagination and get back to journalistic zest, it flows from all these things. The way it is not one aspect. Therefore, at some level, there is a big difference between the way somebody who comes into journalism comes in because it is public good. It can be of any area. It can be gender justice, it can be development stories, it can be political stories, or whatever it is. But they come in because their idea is public good. And the managers come in for one aspect called making it financially sustainable. Therefore, the very fundamental position itself have two different positions. Therefore, for them, they never understand the news gathering expenditure. News gathering costs money. You have to send a reporter. And generally in our days when we went, we were permitted to take a photographer with us. Later, when journalists were being asked to do the photography, what we noticed is that journalists have no company in a faraway place. There was this discussion with your photographer after you come back to your hotel for over the next 3 days helps you to even sharpen your arguments. When you come back to your office and when you're finding a report, it's much more sharper because you discussed it. You know, journalism is also the way of arguing. And half of the argument happened within the newsroom. And within the newsroom, there were cross-sharing of ideas. We had corporate correspondents alerting us of a political development. They said, look, this particular group is going to go and invest in that state. Therefore, we knew that there is something between Biju Janata Dal and that corporate sector for them to go and invest in Orissa. That tip-off did not come from the political desk. It came from the corporate desk. Therefore, the interaction, the in-house corporate interaction, newsroom interaction was so helpful. And we were never bogged down by hourly deadline. I think if it would have been hourly deadline, I would have not been a journalist. I survived because I had one deadline.
So that explains the burnout thing which you mentioned.
Yes, that's the one which is leading to burnout. You can't be having this. See, I have seen that what is happening. They say that it's an hour. What's your problem? It's not an hour from a person who's actually producing the news. He or she has to stop within half an hour and then start processing the story and then file it. Therefore, your news gathering time itself is being reduced. And there is such constant distractions. Therefore, you have to come out and you have to tweet what the Chief Justice of India said. Therefore, all the open court observations have to be tweeted on an hourly basis. And by the time you go back, there might be a very important intervention which will happen that you would have missed, which another news agency will be filing, and you pull up your correspondent. Why did you miss it? Therefore, what is really happening today is we have a set of managers who have no clue of understanding news. When we entered, at least there was a very clear distinction between managerial section and the editorial section. And within the editorial section, our editors ensured that Each one understood the other's pressure. Therefore, every reporter was forced to work in desk for at least 3 months, and every desk person was asked to go out and report for at least 3 months. Because desk always thinks that the reporter is filing late, and the reporters always think that the desk is always advancing the deadline. Okay, this constant, to understand this, what happened was there was this flip. Nowadays, we don't have the space for these experiences. And the lack of this space, let me be honest, if I had to work in today's environment, I may not have been a journalist. And luckily, by the time when these things came in, I become the ombudsman and I have a protected cover around me. That is a different story. But I cannot use my protected cover as an excuse to condone the difficult terrain through which these young journalists have to negotiate.
You're one of the lucky ones, Paneer.
Of course, that I agree.
So
Yeah,
are you,
Manjula.
Shashi?
Usha, yes, come, Usha.
I said, so are you, Shashi. You're also one of the lucky ones.
That's another story.
Mr. Paneer Selvan, you are in the tunnel. I can't see any light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay.
It's
okay.
quite dark, you know. So
Sorry. When we started, there was enough sunlight. Sorry.
So Usha, you're, now it's a different world of Twitter, not the world that Paneer was talking about years ago when you were on the field, isn't it?
Yes, yes. It's a completely different world. And, you know, editors were very powerful then. Editors are no longer as powerful as they were. You know, there's a lot of the management and the business side has taken over the running of journalism because they want dividends. The paper has to survive. So it's no longer the editors who are calling the shots.
I have a question for Usha ji.
Yes.
The development stories that you have done, did some of them make an impact, led to any change in policy or, you know, something very which you feel proud about, like, you know, having written on some issue that government has posed?
Yes, yes, on several issues. On several issues. I think one of my biggest success stories was when I was in the Times of India. This whole people losing their hands due to the harvesting machines, threshing machines. They used to put the paddy and the thing to be thrashed into these machines, and in the process, they used to lose their hands. So I ran a series of articles which the Times of India carried on the front page. It resulted in several changes. The various institutes, design institutes, began to design safer equipment, threshing equipment, and things like that. I mean, there are several stories that I've done. I came back quite.
Shall we just take some questions quickly? Because I think Mrinal will want me to close quickly. So there's one here, and she sent this twice. Srini Mamuni. She says she's pursuing her master's in journalism, and her question is addressed to Manjara, but I think Manjara and Usha can take it. Ma'am, since you mentioned about the real picture of the journalist in today's world, I would request you to please shed some light about the condition of women in journalism. Is it safe for a woman to join? Good question.
Today's times.
Should I take that question, Chachi?
Yes.
Please, please. Yes, anyone can.
Okay. I think you enter any profession, you have to be bold, you have to be strong. You know where you could draw the line, see how much. Even the survey that we did on women journalists in the print media shows, this was in 2004. So even then at that time, we had several instances of editors and people in the newsrooms misbehaving with young women, passing sexist remarks, allowing women to enter into their chambers, into their office spaces with a nude picture on their television, or some suggestive kind of a thing. All these kinds of things. The thing is, you will be facing various problems, but you have to know how to handle the situation. Don't get frightened. You have to. This can happen to you not only in the newsroom. It can happen to you on the road. So you have to be strong. You're there to be a journalist. You have to be a little gutsy. You will have people making passes at you because you're not obliged enough to a certain senior. But you have to be strong and learn to handle the situation as best as you can. If not, get out, I would say.
Yeah, thanks, Usha. I think you answered that well. Paneer, I think this you can take. Nilanjan Saha, it's not framed properly, but I think what he wants to ask is, how important is rural journalism in today's area of journalism? Rural journalism.
Rural journalism has been always important. The question is, do we have resources to encourage rural reporters? Hindu had 3 agricultural correspondents, and where Mr. Venkatramani, G. Venkatramani, was the senior head of the agricultural section, used to know about the latest agricultural research in any of the agricultural lab. Now that's what I am trying to say. This entire in-house expertise on various domains. We have lost on rural journalism. We have lost on labor journalism. There is no more labor beat in any of the papers. We are losing out on our foreign positions. I am witnessing with the Hindu, with the 24 foreign correspondents to 6 today. Therefore, at some level, this is directly tied up to the financial fortunes of the news business. Last interaction with our management team, they said that in 90s, till 90s, 40% of the revenue was coming from something called the classified ad. That has now completely disappeared. They said that, do you know how all these agricultural pages and other things were funded? Tuesday money was spent for the agricultural coverage. So all the profit what they got from the classified ad was used for the agricultural coverage. But at some level, comfortable financial position of the newspaper also helps you to invest on these domains. It's directly linked. It's a political economy of the news industry. This is a one which we have to talk, but given the limited time, I don't think we will be able to explore it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thanks, Paneer. Reena, I can see you
Shashi,
there.
can I come in? Shashi, can I come in for 1 minute?
Yeah, please.
I think there is nothing more important today than rural journalism. We have to bring to the cities what has to be in rural India. There are people who are writing on these issues. The thing is to battle and to get those pages on the front pages of newspapers and not in some back of the beyond. And some newspapers are. I mean, let's look at Sainath. He did tremendous service, the kind of rural journalism that he managed to put on the front pages of the Hindu. There are others. I know there's this young girl in the Indian Express who works from Chandigarh. She does some wonderful agricultural stories. For example, all these stories on the crop residue burning. I mean, she reports exactly how the farmers are feeling. What is it that they want? Why are they doing this? So rural journalism has to get priority if we have to remove the inequalities in journalism in our country. It's very, very important.
And you're doing a fair bit of writing yourself. Your articles appear still in the business line, and you still travel.
Yeah, I do.
So you still inspire many. Okay, Reena, I can spot you there. So instead of me reading out your question, why don't you unmute and ask the question? Reena Mukherjee.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
I asked this question especially in view of the fact that unlike when we came into journalism, where we had to go back and, actually look into old clippings and get a background information on something that we plan to write. Today, we are, actually facing a glut of information. It's not even, much of effort you have to put in. The internet is there for anyone to get some background information when you are wanting to write on something. Yet we find that there is hardly any work put in when there is a news report done. We find that there is hardly any effort put in for digging out background information. So don't you think, I would like to ask this, all the panelists, that there is some lack of commitment. Now, this has been brought up by one of the speakers, so I would like all of you to, elaborate on what do you think on this. Don't you think there is a lack of commitment? Why do the young journalists, or the journalists who are presently working on newspapers or even television, don't you feel there is lack of commitment if we can't go into the background of something? We can do a holistic
Yeah,
job.
okay, got it, Reena. Yeah, we got your question. So what Reena is asking basically is there lack of commitment? So, among journalists, because they don't, according to her, there isn't much perspective, or there is sometimes lack of perspective or background information. Anybody wants to take it? Paneer, Usha, or Manjira? Paneer, you can start.
Okay.
Reena, just mute yourself.
There's only one element there. Is it lack of commitment, or is it the lack of time for them to explore? Are we giving them the adequate time? Do you think that a human being is a computer where you click here, then you get the input and the output this side? We have to see people like Usha Rai or Sainath or Omchi referred, they spend so much of time from the field. Therefore, unless and otherwise there is a space for bearing witness, you can't make sense. What we have done is we have reduced the time for bearing witness for journalists. And you go and ask any chief bureaus. Earlier, if they were willing to give you 4 days to visit a place, now they expect you to come back after a night, because 2 nights staying means the expenditure goes up. Therefore, at some level, if you are going to be a parachute journalist and not a journalist who is immersive journalism costs money. And what is happening is that gladiatorial blood sport, which is happening in a primetime television, had given a sort of ideas to the manager that why are you spending so much of money on news gathering? Say if it is going to be Ladakh, can't you get one former general to write on Ladakh? Earlier, you will send a team to Ladakh. And especially if it's going to be rural journalism or agricultural journalism or distress or anything what we call as deprivation, it needs to be immersive. You have to go there, you have to build trust. You can't become a voyeuristic about their difficulties. It takes time for a young journalist to even make the distinction between empathy and a voyeuristic gaze. What is an empathetic look and what is a voyeuristic gaze? It takes some time. Are we willing to spend all these things? When we were doing journalism, almost all the academics spent so much of time with us. We had Professor A. Vaidyanathan spending so much of time explaining why poverty line was not reduced in poverty to purely income. And he said it's a composite index. Now, how many academics are willing to share? How many political leaders are willing to share? All of them are busy tweeting that they are the first. Academics tweet, politicians tweet, the tweet trap into which we got is the biggest problem. Therefore, I can talk about the politicians, economists, and policymakers who share their knowledge and who are generous in seeing that the idea of public good takes place. And the idea of public good is not one way. And I do not want, I am very, very convinced because I've seen these young journalists. 7 to 8 years, there's a complete burnout. It is not an encouraging scene. And to talk down to them, we are actually accelerating that burnout. And I'm willing to share my experiences in some other time about how this burnout is happening. Multi-skilling, put it for Twitter, put it for Facebook, put it for Instagram. And then other hourly update before your rivals could come up. It's very, very easy to be judgmental. They are living in a much more ruthless reality.
It's a sad world.
Otherwise, we recognize that they are working in an extremely ruthless reality. We will be only judgmental. We are not going to be of any help to them. Thank you.
Shashini, if I can just come in for a minute. Yeah. So, and also the kind of skill sets there, just to take forward from this one, the skill sets they're supposed to have, the skill sets of maybe, digital investigation, for example. A lot of the information nowadays is there in that retrievable format on the digital world. I mean, as they say, there's about 44 zettabytes of digital data available. Almost on everything it's there. And if you know the right tricks of data journalism or elementary maybe machine learning, for example, then it's a different world for you. So many of the younger journalists, many of our younger students are keen to acquire these skills also for a very new kind of journalism, because as we said, there are so many platforms available. Of course, it has to be supplemented by all that legwork, the field work and all. But, the kind of a digital ecosystem we are in. So that these skill sets are the one they're supposed to, acquire. Even, for example, starting from easy Google power searches, the Google itself, if you know how to use it well, the kind of information you'll be getting is immense. So our students, they have to face a lot of, different realities in terms of the content they have to produce for different platforms and for social media, as Mr. Palaniservan says, and at the same time to equip themselves to the best of data journalism, mobile journalism, digital investigation and all these stuff. So this is very, tough on them. I did journalism about 20 years back and I can't imagine doing all that, the kind of things that they're doing. So.
Okay, thanks so much, Shankar. Yeah, thanks. So, okay, my final question to all of you, because before I pass it on to Renal, is this a good time to come to journalism? All of you can take it. Usha, Paneer.
Any day you have to come to journalism.
Yeah.
Only thing is, earlier, people are very, very clear. See, when we came into journalism before that Bachavat award, our salaries, the new generation journalists would be shocked to know. The pre-Bachavat, they don't even know that we had these awards. If you go and tell them about the Bachavat Commission and the award and the entire struggle we had with the management, the new generation had no clue. So what made us to come here? Definitely it was not money. Definitely our friends who opted for IAS and IFS will move power. Definitely our friends who opted for corporate sector having more money. Therefore, we opted for something which had less money and less power. But it had enormous satisfaction. Therefore, any time for journalism, because anything which is public good is a constant investment and no generation should refrain from investing in public good.
Well said. Usha, you still agree it's a sort of social calling, journalism?
Yes, but if you have the commitment, if you want to bring about change and you're willing to work at it hard, get to the grassroots and write, this is a good time even now to get into journalism if you want to be a change maker, to change the way India is structured right now, to remove inequalities, to ensure that people get rights. You can always get that good story, and you will always still find, hopefully, a good editor who will publish your story and give it due importance.
Manjira?
Yeah, I think, we have to stop just thinking about print and focus on the picture, because on the future, because, even now I listen to podcasts for, I go to podcasts for opinions, so all these will come in the future. And I think the youngsters will take to all these platforms more easily, but they have to have some kind of love for, this profession. Otherwise, there's no point, just taking it up and joining a media school, because, it's easiest to get into a media school when you can't get in elsewhere.
Yeah, thanks. So, Uma Shankar, you agree it's not a mechanical thing at all?
No, not at all. I mean, but journalists these days, they can't be just thinking about the good times of maybe Harold Evans, for example, who got 8 or 10 years to carry on a campaign against the company which were the biggest advertisers for his newspaper. The thalidomide people, the distillers, they were the biggest advertisers for their newspapers. But nowadays, with all the revenue kind of mechanisms and all the different kind of content mechanisms and the different kind of content they are supposed to process and get stories out of, this is a very challenging time and a very interesting time. And journalism, of course, will always be relevant, and I'm sure we have very interesting times and very lots of many committed people coming up, and we see a lot of our students coming up with wonderful stories and so on and so forth.
Human interest stories, they all don't have to be, say, investigative or even the human interest stories instead of lifestyle stories. We have too many lifestyle stories, we have to get rid of that attitude.
More about individuals and personalities. Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
Okay, so on that note, let's wind up. It was lovely talking and chatting with all of you. Thank you all for sparing your time to be here. Usha, I know, I'll pass it on to you. Manjira and of course,
one question.
Yes, you can take over.
Chubby Garg. She has been asking twice, does activism on the part of journalists interferes with objective journalism? I guess.
No, I missed that. So,
yes,
sorry.
I guess esteemed panelists may attempt to.
I'll very quickly quote from Harold Evans' book on this thing. On one of these pages, quoting Amitabh Chaudhary, the very well-known Bengali editor, he says, Amitabh told him, for positive journalism, he said, there is no scope, there is no role for the neutralist, no scope for timidity in the name of so-called objectivity. So I think that sums up a lot of an answer to that. A quick answer.
We are ending on a very, very decent, bright, positive note. There is no scope for timidity. There is no scope for lying down. This is the time for journalism to rise up and do its work. I guess with that note, I must thank on behalf of Indian Institute of Mass Communication, Dhenkanal, and Press Institute of India, Chennai, all the panelists. Usha ji, this is for the first time I saw you on virtual platform, but we have been reading you for ages probably now. And the work that you did on women journalists, the status of women journalists, is a pioneering work, and we are thankful for you, to you for doing that. Now, may I request Paneerselvan ji also. I met him for the first time on virtual platform. Thank you, Mr. Nair, for getting Paneerselvan ji, Manjira ma'am, Usha ma'am, and Uma. I consider him as part of IMC Dhenkanal family. All of you are there. May I now request Dr. Mahapatra to give a formal vote. And with that, I must also thank the people who have joined this discussion. Jyoti, please.
Thank you, sir. I must tell today's deliberations were enriching and brilliant by all the esteemed panelists. On behalf of our Institute, Indian Institute of Mass Communication, Dhenkanal, I would like to offer my sincere thanks to Mr. Panir Selvan, Reader's Editor, The Hindu, Usha Rai, one of the senior most women journalists of our country. Ma'am, I must mention, I have written several times, quoted you in my thesis. My thesis was on women journalists. I have mentioned your work many times, the pioneering work that you have done on women journalists. Dr. Uma Shankar Pandey, Head of Department, Journalism and Mass Communications, College of Women, Kolkata. Manjira Majumdar, Senior Journalist. My sincere thanks to Shashi Nair of Press Institute of India for collaborating with Indian Institute of Mass Communication and organizing such a successful event. My thanks to our Regional Director, Dr. Mrinal Chatterjee, and all staffs of Indian Institute of Mass Communication, Bhenkanal, for organizing such a successful event. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everybody. And bye for now. This brings us to the end of the program. I have a small request to Usha ma'am, Manjira ma'am, Panir Selvan ji. Kindly